to One Breath Wisdom, the podcast for therapists, healers, and soul-led space holders, ready to lead from wholeness, not burnout. I am Lisa McNett, founder of One Breath Institute and co-creator of the One Breath Method. Each week, I will be sharing trauma-informed insight, somatic tools, and real stories from the healing path, sometimes solo, sometimes with our co-founder, Debbie Dickey, and sometimes with special guests walking this path in their own powerful way. Together, we will explore how healing, embodiment, and presence can transform the way we live, lead, and care for others without losing ourselves. Let's take a breath and begin. Hello and welcome. I am your host, Lisa McNett, and I have my favorite co-host, Debbie Dickey, co-founder of One Breath Institute. And if you never caught any of our early episodes, you can go way back in time. We had co-hosted Conscious Conversations with One Breath Institute. And there's a lot of conscious conversations out there, we found. And we took a break from podcasting. So once this was relaunched, it is now One Breath Wisdom. And you can find all of these on onebreathwisdom.com. Debbie, we were in the waiting room and we were chatting just about a few themes or core themes that we keep seeing in our community and with our students lately. And we decided what we want to talk about today. One of those themes is a sense of responsibility, specifically feeling as the helpers, the healers, the people who care. We can feel a sense of responsibility specifically for our parents and specifically for fixing our parents, a need to really help the parents. So let's get into it.
Okay, yeah, this is such a spicy topic. And I was telling Lisa earlier that I wanted to bring in a spicy topic, but I didn't know that this is what we would be talking about. And so I'm just noticing there's so many sensations very alive in my body. Because this story, this pattern, this behavior, this belief of like carrying the weight, I think we hear it all the time with people who identify as maybe black sheep of the family or cycle breakers or people who are just wanting to uh, do different than their ancestors, right? Like they feel that weight and they feel the responsibility of fixing the generational trauma, the toxicity, the patterns, the behaviors, whatever is being passed down. They feel the responsibility not only to like break the curse, but also to fix their parents or their caregivers or aunties or whoever was there in their early family dynamics, right? They feel the weight and the responsibility of that. So I'm just taking breath with myself as someone who used to identify this way, and also all the other people listening to the podcast in the future who are maybe feeling very activated. So I'm thinking about this, and yeah, the question comes up is like, well, why? Why does this happen? Why do we feel the weight to fix our parents? And also not just our parents, but you know, the wanting to fix our parents can show up in the partners that we choose too, and those dynamics that we choose in adolescence or in uh, our later adult years, right? Like that same old pattern. Why do I keep picking the same people? Right? It's like, oh, okay, we can trace that back to wanting to fix the childhood dynamic. So why does that happen? And in my experience and what I've observed and learned is that in early childhood, right, we are literally biologically wired to stay connected to our caregivers because our survival depends on it. And so if the parent is distressed, if the parent is unavailable, if they're unsafe, the child may unconsciously say, oh, I'm going to fix them because if they're happier, if they're healthier, then my needs are going to get met. My survival is going to thrive. I won't have to be in crisis too, right? So the child literally thinks if mom, dad, caregivers feel better, then I'll be okay. So it really happens early on, and it's based around our need to survive, which, as we know in our training, going through those energetic cycles, right? That happens the first, that gets established the first, well, really the first 0 to 3 years, but up to 7 to 9, and then we're locked in on these energetic patterns.
Yeah. 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 And so many things coming up for me as you were speaking. And one of those things, I guess the one that I'll pick to speak to is, yeah, it's happening. You know, you said the child thinks, and it's such an unconscious thing. It is such an unconscious, but it is a thought that comes up into the child. Oh, if they're happy, if their needs are met, if they're healthy, then I'll be taken care of. My needs will be met. And let's just add on to this that this gets compounded when parents support this behavior, when parents encourage this behavior, and
Mhm.
it can be, it can be as, a child can take on a coping mechanism of performing or doing this or that to make mommy or to make daddy feel better. And then when mommy or daddy, oh, thank you so much. When you did that, I feel so much better. It's just reinforcing that system. And and that can be an innocent, that's not even adding on to the layers of, maybe more abusive patterns. It's just a less conscious parent appreciating that pick me up from the child and not recognizing that they are reinforcing a pattern that is going to be unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, because whether or not you have children your own, for those who are listening too, I know as someone who does have a child, like the children feel responsible. They always think, I'm the one to blame. If mommy, daddy, caregiver is angry, then it must be their fault. And it's quite literally part of their development, right? It's like whatever a child can control, even the fault, if they can change the dynamic or change the outcome or even shift anything energetically that helps them feel more at ease and also supports their caregiver, right? Like that's a dopamine hit. That's a wire. And that tells them that, yes, I was responsible for this outcome. And now I can also, or for their mood, let's just say that. And
Sure.
now I'm also responsible to helping them change. And so, being flexible with parents, right? Like, yes, all of this is very unintentional or can be just unintentionally habit. And the meeting once a while, it's not a thing. But when it's a reoccurring pattern, especially when the child is being reinforced and celebrated for making them feel better, then that also becomes part of their identity as the helper, especially if they're a firstborn of multiple children below them, younger than them. Right? This is that concept of like role reversal and parentifying children.
Do we want to dive into what it's like being the oldest
Um,
and responsible for the younger siblings, and how that contributes? Or
well, yeah, there's a fun dynamic with that, right? I mean, what's here for me right now is just naming and claiming, especially being the first daughter, the firstborn daughter of any family dynamic, no matter what it is, culturally, through all generations, they carry the responsibility of whatever the roles reflect in the maternal household. So if the mom is a stay-home mom cleaning, that firstborn daughter is also doing the same, right? Like they're mirroring that behavior and also tending to the children. And so that used to be part of our cultural dynamic. And once upon a time, it aided to larger families and health dynamics. But as we've grown and evolved out of how society used to live and more into these spaces where it's just not that way. That behavior is still there, but it doesn't really apply to the social dynamics anymore. And so, yeah, the weight is very burden-esque or it can be, right? I'm not assuming every household is this way, but it can be very burden-esque for the firstborn female child.
yeah, Yeah, well, and when you start to talk about cultural differences and cultural change, it's got me thinking way back to the times when culturally we were in community, when
Mhm.
we were growing
Yeah.
up in community, and that's been such an evolution to where now we truly are, families truly are in many ways isolated from the larger family. And, as I'm also the firstborn child, the older daughter, and but as you were speaking, I was thinking about how I would imagine this applies to only children as well. Only children, so that one child doesn't have maybe the younger siblings to take care of that kind of responsibility. But I'm just curious, and I know you have one one child right now, but this is something that I haven't really looked into or thought about too much, how the potential for responsibility that an only child can take on as parents are getting older and there's nobody else to help.
Okay, so you're kind of speaking to a single child dynamic, or we can even bring in the firstborn female child dynamic too, because that's a common thread that I hear in the community, and I know that that was some of your experience as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, when it comes to parents and as they transition from this life to another, during that end of life transition, the responsibility of caregiving. hmm and not just caregiving, but quite literally everything else when it comes to items and next steps and finances, etc. And also tending to the emotions of other family members.
Yeah.
Maybe that's siblings or maybe that's aunts or someone else, right? It's like I see this a lot where I'll say the firstborn daughter who's tending to the parents and their life transition, they're also like the central hub of everyone else's emotional experiences, right? But
Can be.
they need it, I would even say, the most. Yeah, they would need it the most because something that happens with over responsibility in children or role reversal that we're talking about, feeling that responsibility for the mental, emotional, physical well being of their parents at any age, it essentially tells us in our own brain, in our own body, that our needs are less important. What we need emotionally, physically, mentally, even if that's a little bit of space or some boundaries energetically or in communication around our time and energy, that's not valued.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that gets built into the whole dynamic, all of the family roles. And so even, trying to create those energetic boundaries or create those verbal boundaries can be very, very, very challenging because it disrupts the whole system. But I don't want to dive into that too much. I'm really still connecting with, yeah, when culturally, yes, I can talk about myself. Oldest daughter had to take care of, both of my brothers had to take care of parental needs. We don't need to go into the early story so much, but being of Jewish origin, having on my mother's side that lineage of Orthodox Jew just two steps above, and there were very much being this, I remember being a child and going into the temple, and it's the men are on one side of the room, the women are on the other side of the room. There's a separation based on sex from in so many ways that was one, it's coming through the experience in the lineage, within the body, within the blood, within the bones, and then in the experience, having that experience, going to the temple and and learning what you learn when you're exposed to that culture. So, I'm just thinking about when my grandmother was passing, there were 5 daughters, there were 4 left, excuse me, still alive. when my grandmother was passing. My mother is the middle child. So it was really interesting that the middle, in this case, ended up being the one who was taking on that responsibility, but I was very much involved as well. I was very active and supporting. My grandmother was in a place that was a block behind where I lived. So I was in that responsibility role even for her. And I just remember being at her funeral and the rabbi praising my mom for what a good job she did, and then looking at to me and, you saw what your mom did for your grandmother, and you're going to do the same thing for her. You're going to take care of her so good when it's towards the end of her life, and that is your role, and that is your like literally say, like we first started talking about the message that we take on unconsciously, and then it's also literally like that expectation spoken to depending on your religious, perspectives or familial perspectives or things along those lines. I remember getting very angry, being like, well, I was at my grandmother's funeral. There was a lot of mourning and I was like sad and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then I was like angry. I was like, that's not my responsibility. But then it was my responsibility because when it came down to it, somebody has to be responsible when there's a person can no longer be responsible for themselves. And navigating that whole thing, I think is what we're speaking to, and also navigating the levels of responsibility that we choose to take and also not choose to take, and
Mhm.
being in because that there's negotiations and and all of that, and at the end of the day, yeah, there's just so much involved, but yeah, being that hub and people coming in, just again speaking to my experience, just visitors, friends of hers or whatever, coming in and seeing her and being like, it's really hard, like sending me messages and talking and saying it's really hard to see her that way. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Do you
coming
think I'm
in,
invincible?
like
Like, you
once.
think I have no feelings? Thank
I'm
you
here
for
every
telling me what I
day.
know all the time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and of course that's also just an innocence
Of
communication,
course it
but
is.
in that
Yeah.
way there's no acknowledgement that you're there. There's no there's no curiosity or check-in of how are you? What do you need? Right? Like, I mean, that's the thing. That's the responsibility. And you mentioned it, right? We get to choose how we want to be in responsibility. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of my dad, who I chose no contact with to his death. And so when I chose no contact, that was a choice within myself that I got to meet within myself and go through those feelings of what would it be like for him to be in crisis or in need and need me? How would I respond to that? And so for people who feel this way, circling back, who feel this way, I don't necessarily feel or even believe and perceive there's a right or wrong, but there is an inner compass, and there's an inner compass that's unique to each individual that's trying to do different, do better than their parents and ancestors, that's trying to break curses or however the language is and how it lands, that's just wanting to be free from all of that toxicity, especially if there was addiction, abuse, etc. in the family. And we get to prioritize ourselves and we get to value ourselves so much and our needs so much because, as we've been talking, it's just not culturally ingrained yet to even see the firstborn daughter or anyone who steps up to the plate or whoever is feeling the responsibility of the family. Like, there is no recognition of the work and the inner turmoil and maybe even the emotional chaos and distress that's going on internally, but they simply cannot express it to family members or express it in ways that they can receive clearly because from early age, that responsibility, those people pleasing, right? Emotional exhaustion. I'll even use the word self sacrifice, right? Like these patterns are so deeply ingrained that other people are so used to it that, oh my gosh, what if you said to them, I'm having a terrible time? I'm not okay. I need some help. It would freak out the whole dynamic.
Yep.
They would freak out. They'd be like,
Yes.
wait, what? The stable one, that's got their shit together. And it's like, well, maybe on the outside, but I'm human too. Like, it doesn't matter how much emotional regulation and trauma healing, et cetera, et cetera. When parents transition, it's an experience that started when we were born. And so yeah, there's a lot in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think I kind of carried us towards this like transition theme, but what feels really juicy here and spicy here, and that I'd really think would be a great service for us to explore would be this place where parents are maybe not on the verge of transition yet, but starting to lose agency, starting to need more support. And that idea that people have of like, okay, maybe now I should have my parents move in with me, or now I have to do XYZ because my parents need me. So let's go to that place, because I feel like that's a really slippery slope where a person can just dive in and get lost from that place of reaction to from the early childhood experiences, instead of stopping and looking and being like, okay, I have agency. What are the conscious choices that I want to make from a place of not feeling like I have to, or a place of feeling guilty?
Yeah. Well, what I want to offer here is just that language shift, right? Anytime we hear ourselves or even hear our loved ones, friends, frenemies say, I have to, oh, I have to do it. That is a clear indicator. Well, maybe actually you don't have to. And that there's a pattern that's repeating here of that guilt, of that blame, of that responsibility, of the even question, who am I as a daughter if I choose not to do these things? Right? There may be even an identity shift coming up. And so to reclaim that self agency and to invite, honestly, more flexibility and freedom in our choices, we get to say, I get to I get to be the person to care for XYZ. I get to do this. And when we sign up for that, we're also creating that separation that what's happening here is mine. What's happening there is them. Because ooh, this may be tender. This may be tender for our listeners here, but also what's coming up with that is like when making these choices, when our parents specifically are losing their agency and are physically needing support, we get to make accommodations that support our life, right? We don't have to sacrifice our life. It can feel that way at times, but we can structure it in ways that it doesn't have to feel sacrificial. Um, And with that, it's also like an indicator that we're not valuing what we need, right? We're not prioritizing what we need. And I'm losing my train of thought of the thing that was tender, so I'm wanting to call it back for a moment. Um, okay. Also with this is this belief. Um, what is it? It's like there's like this, and I see it with so many people. I've been so curious about that. It's like this belief to like if you were a person who was abused, neglected by your primary caregivers, and you find yourself in the position where you get to care for them in their end of life transition. Maybe that's an age, or maybe that's because they're addicts. Okay, age is not really a thing, but how do we, which I have some answers, but I'm curious with you, how do we honor and respect ourselves and our truth and what happened with us while also supporting them? Um, there's this belief that people, or like this pressure that, oh, we must forgive and forget and love and invite joy and remind them of how amazing they are. That was something that happened with my dad's passing. I remember sharing with you. It was like so bizarre to me. to see so many people speak such light about my father. Um, mm-mm, they knew a completely different man than me, right? And so I don't know if that was necessarily their whole truth experience either, right? They could be transferring or something else, bring whatever. But yeah, that dynamic of how do we what happens there? I don't know. What's the thought that's coming, Lisa? Like it's not clear just yet. There's this energy around ensuring that the people that harmed you or maybe caused long-term healing needed, that we just forget and we forget.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a feeling when you got into it that this is where you were going to go, is to that forgiveness place. And whew, that one is a really interesting and tough one for me. It's 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 so perpetuated in society in so many different. It comes in through, so I see it like move, it's like tendrils. It comes in through the spiritual community. It comes in if you are, yeah, many different spiritual communities, religious communities, the church in particular, but not just the church. People misunderstand Buddhism, and people misunderstand, and the mental health world as well, this concept of forgiveness. And so, if we really look at it, from a developmental standpoint, when that child was young and their needs are not being met and they're doing what they can, they've adjusted themselves to make mommy or daddy feel better, to do what they need to do to take care of mommy and daddy, we can feel like a failure.
Mm,
Can
mhm,
feel like a failure. Like I
mhm.
failed because mom and dad ended up like this, and this, right?
Or they don't love me. They
Or they
didn't
don't love
choose me.
me,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, they don't, all of those things, but
Mhm,
now they need me.
mhm.
And I'm such a healed
Helper.
and good person that I can just forgive them. Or if I really lean into forgiveness, then that's like a dharma or a part of the path. Like the leaning into forgiveness,
Mm,
right, is a
mm,
path
mm.
that can support me in moving my karma and getting to heaven. Like, what is the story that we're going to put behind that,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
that's perpetuated, and oftentimes the parent is still abusive, just in the language that they're using, in the way that they're treating. But it's bringing that same conflict
Yeah.
again, and and that perpetuation of that trauma cycle is the nervous system giving you that opportunity to make a different choice, to heal and to integrate something that's here. And most people just, or too frequently, stay stuck in that loop and think that the different choice is the way that I'm responding now, instead of the different choice being like, let me actually create boundaries and self prioritize.
Yeah. Yeah, the pressure of feeling responsible and then the pressure of forgiveness. Again, this conversation is unique to each person, each relationship dynamic. It's all intercompassed, it's all individual. I have absolutely felt truly in that frequency of forgiveness, but it doesn't look like diminishing or bypassing the actions of what happened. The forgiveness that I have felt in my body is more of at peace that those actions will no longer impact me. And so it's less about feeling like righteous and saying, oh, I forgive you for harming me. No, for me, it's not like that. For me, it's being at peace that honestly, we're safe. I think I shared with you, I felt such a sense of relief when my father died. And then I had to I got to experience what this relief really meant. And I went through the stages of forgiveness, and I went through this of the mind, like what forgiveness I was told and what it should identify and what it looks like. And I did entertain those moments of, I'll say bypassing my own experiencing for the sake of forgiving his soul for whatever the storyline is in that. But really what that felt like for me in my body was an opening of love and of peace that I do hold for my father and I do hold for my parents. And I also hold the very real experience that my dad was not a great guy and he just was not a good man. He may have had good relationships with other people and moments in life where he did good things. Absolutely. Right. We are not one singular experience and we cannot be identified as one singular moment in time. But the overall experience with him was not good. And yeah, that sensation of feeling forgiveness at the end for those who maybe feel that way, wherever the relationship is. I will share in my experience, it feels like an opening and a peace, but there is also the accountability and the responsibility gets put back on the parent. And that is actually for me like where the forgiveness comes from. It's like pushing it back onto them because I'm doing a disservice. And as we are adults and we are choosing to integrate and to heal our family dynamics, if we take on that responsibility, then we also get to forgive ourselves for being a disservice and put the weight back on to those that need to carry their own accountability for their actions. Is that making sense?
It is. It is making sense, and I'm really connecting with it, and it feels like that weight and that lack of uh inner resolution of trauma is what is so entangled with that sense of responsibility for the parent. It is those unmet childhood needs. And yeah, so yeah, we've talked about this a little bit. We have similar relationships with our dads, and I when my father passed in 2009, we had been no contact. We had been no contact, but then when I found out, as soon as I got the call, he was in the hospital, he's not well, I showed up there, and my process was wanting to have resolution, right? Like wanting to have this like hallmark moment of, I'm so sorry, for what I did to you, blah, blah, blah. And I say this because this is what comes up for me when you talk about that, putting that responsibility back on. Like our listeners might be like, I tried that. Like I am always trying to get, my mom or my dad to take accountability, but they never will. And this is a different thing. They are not always necessarily going to acknowledge it. So I never got my hallmark moment was was my father being who he was all the way up until he passed, which was not nice, which was abusive. And yes, he had psychological issues, had his own traumas, things along those lines. And I was able to my acceptance and my healing and my putting all of that back was coming to terms with, okay, this is it's just coming to terms with reality. It's accepting the truth. It's accepting the situation as it is, and then I'm not having any expectations or belief that it could have been something else.
Yeah, because the wishing, the hoping, the dreaming, I mean, that is a huge part of that fragmentation as children when we do not feel emotionally safe in our family dynamic and we receive the responsibility of caring for the emotional well-being of our parents, whatever it is, then part of us still wishes and dreams and hopes that they'll just magically change on their own so we can finally get our needs met, so we can finally have these hallmark whatever TV shows, XYZ storylines that are being told, or maybe we're once upon a time envious of our friends and their parents' relationship. Like, wow, what would it be like? You know? And so, yeah, you're right. Like that word acceptance, it's not acceptance of the actions. We don't have to come to terms with what happened or what didn't happen, what we didn't get. Like I used to absolutely daydream, fantasize what would be like to have a completely different relationship with my parents. And coming to terms with the reality is so full. And what that is embodiment. It is merely embodiment from that fragmented piece where we felt unsafe. And so we got activated, we maybe even lifted or disconnected from our body as children or however it happens. And when we come into acceptance, we can come back into this earth, this biological vessel, this body, be in relationship with it, anchor in that safety and say, okay, yeah, wow, this is my experience. I accept it.
Yeah.
I accept that my relationship is what it is, and I did all that I can and above and more. And this is also a liberation and part of that liberating of responsibility. Because when we come to terms with acceptance, then we also recognize that we were children, we were youth, just bundles of joy that just so deeply wanted love and safety and play. Someone to be tender and to care and to just invest in our lives as children or to learn the world through us, right? Um, but many of us didn't get that. And so that acceptance piece helps us because essentially what we're doing in that moment is parenting our own inner child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
And these words like forgiveness, acceptance, it really is a frequency that we get to feel into. And as someone who truly believes that I forgave XYZ in situations, now knowing and feeling that frequency of forgiveness and where I feel it in my body, I can recognize that that was a stage to get to that.
Yeah.
And so if our listeners are like, well, how do we accept and how we, whatever the list is, how do we forgive? It's a practice of feeling and also receiving love and genuine connection from other relationships, because it is through other relationships where we learn that the other relationships that we had were not actually safe, and maybe were actually unhealthy and abusive, right? And so if we don't give ourselves the opportunity to experience more relationships, whether that's superficial or more intimate, whatever the dynamic is that we're available for with that person, or even animal too. Um, I just lost my train of thought. I just was thinking about my animal, and I was thinking about my daughter's little hamster. Now
Yeah.
we named her Fluffy, and I'm learning that I love little animals. And I wanna say rodents, but is that bizarre? Of course it is, whatever, I like rodents, I
Yeah.
like little animals, and so I just triggered myself in thinking about the animal and how much joy I get from taking care of this beautiful little life that maybe other people are fearful of.
Well, and that's a much more appropriate place to place um, that part of you that wants to tend to and care for, because we all have these parts that want to tend to and nurture and care for. And so we can use these parts and take on people, and I'll say people because it could be parents, it could be family members, it could be a romantic relationship, right? Like there's such a common thread and theme of the empath and the narcissist, and I was kind of hesitating on saying those words because it doesn't necessarily mean that all these people are narcissists, but it's just something that is we hear about it all of the time. Like, I don't know why I keep attracting these narcissists, and it's coming from this part that is wanting to nurture and tend to, and it's coming through in a way that maybe isn't the healthiest. But yeah, getting a little cute little fluffy fluffer. That's a very appropriate place to work with those tendencies.
Yeah, and for me, I was bringing it up more so because, if our parents are the only relationships that we have for a while, and that gives us the foundation of something, like, I did not get the opportunity truly to know what it feels like to bond with an animal. I did have animals growing up. Some were my mom's. I did take on an animal at a big crisis time, so I couldn't, anyways, young. But now as an adult, I have many animals and I love animals. And this is part of that connection to life and just giving the opportunity for those who maybe only know connection and relationships to be overgiving, people pleasing, self sacrificing, minimizing our experiences, to allow yourself to open up and even practice different levels of relationships, different kinds of relationships, um, so that we can receive from other people.
Yeah, and with that comes a willingness to open up to receiving.
Hmm.
Because and I'm just gonna speak that as well, because if we don't know another kind of relationship and we keep attracting the same one, how then, "Okay, Debbie, how like, I'm doing it, I'm having all these different relationships, but they're all the same." Where it becomes different is where it it may not it doesn't feel the same in your nervous system. Doesn't
Right.
feel the same
No.
in your nervous system. It might feel really uncomfortable, and it will involve, like you're saying, Debbie, a mutual support and offering, uh, and we need to be willing to receive instead of just this, like, I got it. I this is my role. That how some of us will get when we are met with that.
Yeah, because if you we'll just bring that dynamic of the empathic person being in relationship with a narcissistic behavior. I'll more commonize it. Empathic behaviors, narcissistic tendencies. We'll just say
Perfect.
that,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't have to fully identify as one or the other.
Yes.
But in that dynamic, yeah, if that's all you know, like I joke with our students in One Breath Institute. I'm like, if I knew that the louder you yell, the stronger you hit, the more you threat. What, like, that's how you love. That's how you show your love. And then when I meet my husband who won't yell at me, who won't hit me, or like won't challenge me in some way, then for a while that like did. It was like, oh, you don't love me. You don't love me enough. And so, yeah, we get to, you know, there comes a point in our life where we get to give the responsibility back to our parent. We get to re-inner parent our inner child, and with that comes taking accountability and responsibility for how we are also contributing to the unhealthy dynamics of relationships, especially if we see them in patterns over and over again. And so sometimes that comes with, people breaking down and finally saying enough is enough. Um, Hopefully more people don't reach those points along the way, right? But there is a choice that we get to make. We do get to choose, and at some point we do get to take the responsibility and say, oh wow, I was choosing this behavior at some point, right? Like at some point, even if all we know is one thing, we know it doesn't make us feel good. We know it doesn't help us feel expansive and authentic. And we know it feels unsafe in some way because it's making us small, or we have anxious feelings, or maybe there's chronic pain, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is some indicator along the way that communicates to us where we do know that this dynamic is not correct for us anymore.
Yes. And this brings in self-value, self-worth,
Hmm.
the feeling of like, I can't do any better, or I, it's something about me, like I'm wrong, or I'm all wrong, or so I'm bringing in, when we talk about forgiveness, self forgiveness, we
Hmm.
can be so hard on people can be so hard on themselves in these situations while also just gifting the forgiveness to those who should hold the responsibility. So, bringing in some self forgiveness and compassion for yourself when you make these choices.
Yes, and as someone who intentionally worked on some self-forgiveness, uh, for those listeners who don't like feeling embarrassed, that's just part of it. You know, the sensations of embarrassment or humility, like, there are absolutely actions that I have contributed to in the chaos of my relationships. I'm human. Like, we've all do this, right? But when it comes to that self-forgiveness, we get to feel those maybe embarrassing moments or things that we aren't necessarily so proud of in our responsibility to contribute, and allow those feelings to be there. It is literally, it's not an indicator of our worth. It's not an indicator of who we are. It is merely a sensation, a feeling that we're connecting in our brain and our mind that says, oh, these actions are not what I want anymore. These behaviors are not what I want to contribute in relationships anymore. And so I say that for those in self forgiveness. You know, yeah, and we can even bring up the word shame a little bit. You know, I do believe that there are healthy levels of shame, embarrassment, and humiliation, especially when it comes from our ownership. When we recognize that our behaviors, our thoughts are not serving us or others, then we can have those healthier experiences of shame or embarrassment or humiliation that are temporary and that are appropriate for the situation and that don't tie into roots of judgment, um, or maliciousness or, yeah, whatever it is, and then grows into something deeper. Where I feel that shame is unhealthy and embarrassment and humiliation is unhealthy is when external, like parents, push on someone else or an abuser XYZ, you know, the action, they make the person feel responsible for them. And all of those unhealthy feelings actually belong to them and they can return and go and process that.
Yeah. 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 Well, and all of those societal.
Mhm.
Ugh, we
Mhm.
don't.
Mhm.
So my question for you was going to just be, what would you what would your recommendation be for somebody who is recognizing themselves in any of these patterns or situations to get started if they're brand new? If this is a new concept, a new idea, what will support them in getting started with this reclamation of boundaries and inner parenting process?
Well, what comes to mind for for this topic specifically, even though it's very dynamic, but it also applies to a lot of other things too, is really discerning our own individual belief systems. Because a lot of this pressure is not just ours; it's literally since way back when, and so it's so intertwined and interwoven. And a lot of the times, our actions or lack thereof comes from our belief systems. And so, if I believe that I'm responsible to care for my parents, no matter what, and I hold that belief that I am the singular responsible person for my parents, then my choices and even my healing is going to look drastically different than maybe holding the belief system of I will contribute to, I am a part of my parents' well-being, or I am a part, right? Like just having that separation from the full responsibility. So I would say writing out the current belief systems and then reading them and seeing if that's actually true for you.
Yeah.
You know, like because the relationship dynamic with my father, I felt so responsible to fix him. I mean, that was my belief till the end. Yeah. Yeah, I really believed that I was here to fix or break the curse or break the cycle, and that led me down a really great healing path but it also was very limiting in my self-expression and my authenticity, and the list goes on. And so for me, that belief, I was never meant to carry his pain. And I actually no longer believe that I am meant to carry the weight and to be the singular person to break the curse of the family. I no longer believe that. In actuality, they can do it. And I'm giving the responsibility back. Whew, you can do it.
Or
Maybe
not.
that's my part, right?
Yeah.
Or not. Exactly. Or not. Either way, the
Yeah.
choice is that I will no longer be impacted, right? And so, yeah, just to answer your questions, just checking in on our belief systems and getting really clear, because sometimes people don't even know. They don't even know what they believe on that unconscious, subconscious, conscious. Like they just don't know.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
say it all the time. You only know when you know. And
Yeah.
so with that knowledge, what do you choose?
Yeah. 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 And being in that of like writing down, I love that, just writing down all the beliefs, getting clear, checking into them. And if one feels so strong as if there is no choice, then I would add, there's always a choice. There's always an alternative. I would add to take that one and just get really curious about what life might be like if that wasn't true. What might be possible if that isn't true.
Yeah, because our brain loves survival, this or that. 1, 2, polar experience, right? And even in finding solutions or finding an answer, it's very a limited, a narrowed experience. But when we tune into the body and get curious of, is there a possibility of something different than this belief system or this thought? The answer is always yes. Are we open to receive the possibility? I mean, and with that though, being gentle listeners, if you choose this practice, do know that it's a reality shifter. I love and then just speaking on the fun spiritual community where people are like, "Oh, you want to shift timelines, you want to shift your reality." This is quite literally how you do it. Like it's
Yes.
not a magical thing that you go somewhere and have this full reality shift. No, you get to get honest with yourself. You get to get real with yourself, and you get to invite conscious intention and connection and discernment and discovery or remembrance of what is true for you as an individual of your family lineage.
100%.
Let's mic drop on that one.
All right. So
Oh.
this feels complete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please share your comments and share this with anyone who might need to hear this message. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to One Breath Wisdom. If something in today's episode spoke to you, I would love to know it. Send me a message on Instagram at One Breath Institute or at Lisa McNett, and please share the episode with someone else who needs to hear it. Remember, you are not here to carry it all. You are here to come home to yourself, one breath at a time. Until next time, take a breath and be well.